But we're in Exodus 13, and so Israel has been 430 years in Egypt. 400 of those years have been in slavery, and they finally are going to leave Egypt and make their way toward Canaan, where God had promised their father Abraham that he would return there after 400 years. And so now they are on their way out of Egypt and headed to Canaan. It will be 40 long years before they actually get there, not because it's a long journey, because it's not, but because they will murmur and complain, and they'll have to wait till all the murmurers and complainers die before they can go in to Canaan. Um, Trying to think of a church analogy, but I think I'll leave it alone. All right. Um, they went, they went down to Egypt, 70 of them, and they are now coming out of Egypt, hundreds of thousands. They had followed God's direction and prepared themselves for the Passover by the Passover meal, by the blood over the lintels of the door. And now they are going to move toward um, the land of promise. There's three parts really here in chapter 13 that I want to deal with. There'll be the mention of the firstborn, and we'll do that really quickly. There's a discussion of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then there's a more specific discussion about the matter of the firstborn that we will look at before we get to chapter 14. So let's read verses 1 and 2. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. It's a pretty clear statement, but there's not a lot of qualification. There's not a lot of parameters set. We'll read about those later on in the text. But I do think it would be good to say, had a house in Israel or in Goshen not followed the command of the Lord to put the blood over the door, judgment would have come to their house too. I think that's a statement we need to understand. Had an Israelite or a Hebrew said, I don't think I'm going to bother because I don't think it's going to affect me, the text indicates that they would have been judged. They would have received the same judgment as did the Egyptians. So it is clear with the death of the firstborn that the firstborn is crucial in the plan of salvation. The firstborn animal is sacrificed later. Jesus is God's only begotten son. There's lots of analogies. And so the whole firstborn discussion is pretty crucial. We'll talk about it more here in just a few moments. But the first two verses just kind of mention it, and then they move on, and then they come back to it. But in Numbers 8:17, there is the statement, all the firstborn among the children of Israel are mine, both man and beast. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified them to myself. So there's an indication that this act of the killing of the firstborn, where there was no blood over the door, kind of launched God's plan, God's strategy, if you will, of making the firstborn crucial to his plan. Again, we will discuss it more later. So then we get to verses 3 through 10, and there is a discussion of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And we've already talked about it because they had the feast, or they had the meal with unleavened bread because they were preparing for the Passover. But now God is saying, this is how I want you to act when you get to the land of promise. Now this is a perpetual celebration. It wasn't just a one-time act. This is now going to be something you are going to continue to do for generations to come. So verse 3, so Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten on this day. You are going out in the month of Abib. And it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. So, in other words, God is saying this is not just a one time thing now. You're going to continue to do this when you finally get to the land of promise. And then he gives some description. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall, when I read that, this is completely off subject, but it makes me think of when Kayla was little. Um, you had to tell Kayla all the things not to do, or she would find a loophole. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had to say, "Don't tell her I said this when you see her Sunday." All right, she knows it's true, but and now she's going to raise two kids just like that, I'm sure, and I'm going to laugh all the way. But um, if you couldn't just say, "Don't cry." You'd have to say, "Don't cry, don't stomp your feet, don't slam the door." You had to get the whole list. And if you forgot something, she would do that one thing. All right. And then, like in a good attorney, she may get that from her father. She would then say, but you didn't say don't do that. All right. So God says, no unleavened, no leaven. And then he says, no leaven in your quarters. He's having to give them, he's having to spell it out to these folks, or they are liable to find a loophole. So when I read this, and I know that meant nothing to you, but it was just fun to talk about busting on my daughter. That's kind of fun. So, unleavened bread, verse 7, shall be eaten 7 days. Now, look, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you. So, that to me says it. But then he gives more clarity, and no leavened bread shall be seen in all your quarters. So, he's really giving them the details. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, "This is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year." So God is just simply saying, okay, this was not a one time deal. This is going to be something that you perpetually celebrate, and you are to do it so that you can remember the goodness of God. The special observances, the special meals, the unique diets are all planned to invoke the question from the children, why are we doing this? All of that is to cause the kids to say, "Hey, Dad, why are we eating different this week? Why do we have this meal once a year? Why are we having this strange food? Why is our bread flat?" All of that is designed so they will ask that question so that the answer could be given. This is a memorial of when God brought us out of our bondage. All right. It very simply, we can dissect it and come up with all sorts of types, and they are there, but the lesson is we need to have memorials where we tell our kids and our grandchildren what God has done for us. That's how you perpetuate faith, is rehearsing what the Lord has done for you. And so that's really the impetus of this entire section. And then it would lead to the ultimate question: how did he get us out? And he would be able to say, "We put blood over the door." And again, this is just an opportunity to share what God has done. So in chapter 12, they practice this immediately before leaving Egypt. But here in chapter 13, they are now to wait until they get to Canaan, and then they are to celebrate this feast perpetually. Now we move to verse 11. And here there is an unpacking of the law of the firstborn. Verse 11. You shall be, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he has sworn to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb, that is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have. The males shall be the Lord. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of the man among your sons, and all the firstborn of the man among your sons you shall redeem. So it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall say to him, by strength of hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both firstborn of man and firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be a sign on your hand and his frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. So again, God is instituting something that will invoke questions from the young people. Dad, why are we killing the first animal of that litter? Why are we redeeming the donkey? Why is there this? And we'll talk about with the humans what they do, but it is to invoke the question, why are we doing this with the firstborn? So that the parent or the grandparent can explain this firstborn's a big deal to God. It was the firstborn that died in Egypt so that we could come out. And obviously, all of us immediately then see the picture of God's only beloved son. It's a picture pointing to that. So, this is the law of the firstborn, which we read in verse 1 and 2. Look at verse 2, consecrate to me all the firstborn. So now we get some details about what the law of the firstborn is all about. This is the first time this law of the firstborn is going to be mentioned, but not the last time. Actually shows up, I think, 5 times in the Pentateuch, actually 5 more times. I see that's in my notes. And no two of these are exactly the same. So it seems to be like there's a little change in details as we go. Victor Hamilton says that so it'd be 6 times total, this time and 5 more times in the Pentateuch, that the law of the firstborn is mentioned. Hamilton says they're difficult to reconcile and likely have to do with the changing laws for Israel based on their willingness to obey and respond. That actually makes sense. It may cause you to struggle initially. There's change because God had to change because they didn't obey and respond. Well, think about, remember the whole law of divorce, and they made a big deal about that in the New Testament. And well, God made this change because this is how you were behaving. And so, and plus, this nation is growing. We talked about a little bit last week. We'll mention it a lot here in a couple of weeks. These are people that have been slaves for 400 years. And again, can you imagine they've been slaves for 400 years and have not had any freedom? And now all of a sudden they are going to come out and they're going to wander around in a wilderness, and they're all supposed to get along. There's no law yet, there's no rules. And that's why when we get to chapter 18, poor Moses wearing himself out, because I mean, can you imagine the things they're arguing about? They're bringing to him, they took this of mine and they took this of mine. This is a bunch of people have been slaves for 400 years, and now all of a sudden they're thrown out in the middle of the wilderness and they have to get along. I mean, just think, if we had no rules, no rules at all, and the 60 of us had to get along, we would struggle with that, right? Yeah, we would. Trust me, we would. Anyway, so Victor Hamilton says that change should not surprise us. So, but what is clear is that the firstborn pure animals are sacrificed. That's part of this. They are sacrificed, they die. Impure animals could be redeemed or ransomed. And the firstlings or the firstborn of humans are also redeemed. I'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. Menachem Posner, rabbi, said a Pidyon Haben, or redemption of the firstborn son, is a ceremony wherein the father of a firstborn male redeems his son by giving 5 silver coins to a Kohen, which is a priestly descendant of Aaron, 30 days after the baby's birth. So if I was a Jew, I would redeem my firstborn, Kyle, my firstborn son, by when he's 30 days old, giving 5 coins to the priest. So you don't kill your firstborn son, you kill the firstborn animal, but you redeem the firstborn of the sons. That was part of the law of the firstborn. Numbers 18, I put this in here as well. Everything that first opens the womb of all flesh, which they bring to the Lord, whether man or beast, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of man you shall surely redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem, and those redeemed of the devoted things you shall redeem with 1 month old, according to your valuation, for 5 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. So the firstborn would be redeemed in this manner. There is some thought, and I think this is um, borne out in the story of, remember when Elkanah and Hannah um, wanted a child. Remember, Hannah was barren, and she was praying in the temple, but not out loud. And Eli, the priest, saw her lips moving and thought she was drunk. Remember that? And she said, "Don't rebuke me. I'm not drunk. I'm praying for a son." And she has a son. And what is his name? It's Samuel. And when he is weaned, Samuel was taken to the tabernacle, later would be the temple, where he would serve. And so the sense is that the firstborn would be consecrated, redeemed with the 5 shekels, consecrated to serve. Now, originally, it seems, and it's a little hard to figure out from some of the sketchy details of the Pentateuch, but originally it seems that the firstborn were to be the priest. Um, but when they failed with the golden calf, um, it became the Levites who would serve as priests instead. But the firstborn, or the law of the firstborn, remain in place. Now, look at Exodus 32. I put it in your notes. This is remember when Moses goes up top of the mountain and he doesn't come down in time, and Aaron, they wanted Aaron to do something, so Aaron made the golden calf, and then Moses came down and threw the tablets down, and God is angry and God's ready to destroy them. Here's what happens. Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so became a laughing stock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have," to the Levites, "been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." This would have been when the transfer from the firstborn as priest to the Levites likely would have occurred. All right. Now, let me take you on um, a speculative journey, although I think it can be borne out. God originally said to Israel, "You're going to be a kingdom of priests." And then it seems like there was a tilt to the firstborn. And then the tilt went all the way to the tribe of Levi. Only the Levites are priests. And then Jesus comes and he becomes our great high priest. And then First Peter 2 says, you, us, are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. It is as if full cycle has come. God intended for it to be the nation of Israel. The firstborn became the Levites. And then there was one in the perfect high priest who then says to us, you are now a chosen generation and a royal priesthood. So I think it's important to kind of follow that line as well. But this law of the firstborn, again, we have it in 6 different places and the details do not all match up. But basically, what it is the firstborn animal is to be sacrificed, the firstborn um, son is to be redeemed and in some way serve in the service of the Lord. Now, go to chapter 13, verse 17. Let me just read a few more verses here. 17. And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with them, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So they took their journey from Succoth, and they camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Now, chapters 13 through 18. We get to 18. 18 is kind of the trying to think of the word. It's the rock on which the two sides of the teeter-totter would go. It's kind of the crux. 18 is the bridge. Why didn't I just say bridge to start with? All right, 18 is the bridge between coming out of Egypt and getting to Sinai. All right, but chapters 13 through 18 describe the first 2 months of Israel's freedom out of Egypt. Moses doesn't tell us everything that happens. He is selective, but there are 6 things that he records, and they are here. Let me just give them to you. Although it looks like I only listed 5. We'll see if I put 2 in 1 here in just a minute. All right. First of all, the route that God leads them on is not a route that would lead to many great threats and intimidating enemies like the Philistines. Down that second set of notes, there's a map on the back. If you want to just reference that real quickly, you will notice where they come out, be on the left side or the west side of the map, where they come out. And if you were to go like to the northeast along the Mediterranean, it probably says on your map the way of the Philistines or something about the Philistines. Okay. That would have been the quickest route toward Canaan. But instead, they go south and they wander around down by Sinai. But the Philistines were seafaring people right there on the Mediterranean Sea. They were violent people. And it seems that Israel was not nearly organized enough, strong enough, ready to fight that. And it would have been horribly discouraging. And so God did not send them by way of the Philistines. All right. They would likely have wanted to turn back. So, second thing is they did go by the way of the Red Sea, verse 18. Third thing is they carried the bones of Joseph with them per the request of Joseph on his deathbed. And their route was toward Etham, verse 20. And the cloud and the pillar accompanied them, verse 21 and 22. So that's what Moses does tell us in this short little section of scripture. Let's go to chapter 14 now. We are I'm gonna teach through this. If there's time, I will at least walk you through the other document that gives some explanation to um, their crossing of the Red Sea in more detail. So, chapter 14 and verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi Hiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon, and you shall camp before it by the sea. So the bottom line is, and I gave you about 5 pages of extra documentation, the exact location. Now, we all have maps in the back of our Bible. Depending on what version, you may have different maps, and you may have these places located different places, because there is no absolute definitive sense, certainty, I guess I should say, of the exact location of these three places. You have to understand that they did not have Google Maps back then. Does everybody understand that? And we are always learning with more archaeological digs. They find, in fact, I'll reference something if we get to it, about hieroglyphics where there are markings and they say, okay, that must have been where this was. But there are sometimes confusing markings. And so archaeologists are not inspired. How many understand that? Scripture is inspired. If there's a problem in our understanding, it's not a problem in Scripture. It's just that we haven't fully understood it yet, or we haven't dug up enough layers yet. All right, so the exact location of these three places is unknown. Migdal and Baal Zephon are likely Hebrew names, and Pi Hiroth is likely an Egyptian name. Migdal is related to the word Migdal, spelled slightly different in its transliteration, which means a fortress. And there is a town called Migdal. I'll say Migdal, so they sound different. In Jeremiah 46, and there may actually be as many as 4 different Migdals in the Old Testament. All right. So pinpointing Migdal when it is so close to Migdal is not an exact science, and no one has the exact science. Um, Baal Zephon means Baal of the North. All right. So this would actually be a move for Baal worship, which was primarily in the South. And so this would be, to call it Baal in the North, Baal Zephon, would have been a move of some kind. Verse 3 and 4. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So this is where Pharaoh's about face is predicted. Um, Pharaoh's probably going to change his mind. That's what the text says. And so Pharaoh gets his military strategy ready to go. Um, he actually thinks, I put Egypt, but he thinks that Israel, not Egypt, is in trouble. And so they're probably just wandering around. They're going to get closed in. And so his mind begins to roll, and he's going to plan to deploy and go after them. But God will again harden his heart. Let me just look at that verse again. Verse 4, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all of his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So again, God hardens his heart so that they will recognize that he is God. And they will know that when they are ultimately destroyed. Um, and so Pharaoh gets ready to deploy um, his army. Verse 5. Um, Now it was told the king of Egypt, everybody's running Yul Brenner through their head right now, and the Ten Commandments, I know. It's told that the king of Egypt, that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. Notice what they do immediately. Why have we done this? That we have let Israel go from serving us, that we have let Israel go from serving us. So he made ready his chariot, and he took his people with him. Also, he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. The children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horsemen, horses, and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi Hahiroth before Baal Zephon. So now his about face that was only predicted is now actualized. Again, I would argue that God is not the initiator of the hard heart, but he has rejected God over and over, and God finalizes or cements the hard heart. Um, it would not wreck me if God was the initiator of the hard heart. God can do whatever God wants to do. That just is a plank in the Reformed theology that says God picks and chooses who gets saved and who does not. So I struggle to go all the way out and say that. I think everyone has a choice, even Pharaoh. So that's my little spiel there. We've talked about that a dozen times. So Pharaoh has a change of heart. God hardens it. He thinks that the wilderness is going to enclose them, but he doesn't realize that the sea is going to ultimately enclose him. That's by the way, kind of a play on words there. He thinks they're going to be trapped. He has no idea that they're about to be trapped in the waters of the Red Sea that will cover him. He has no sense of what Israel will do. And notice Israel, as we're going to see in a moment, has no sense in what God is about to do. All right. Because they do what good Israelites always do. They do what good Christians apparently do as well. When things aren't going like we think, they complain. Verse 2. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel, verse 10, excuse me, when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried to the Lord. And then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we told you in Egypt? Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And so they are angry. They see the Egyptians coming. The first sign of trouble, they become hopeless. They're they were the they were the first of the overly dramatic people, all right? And now we have a whole world of overly dramatic people. But they were, oh no, here they come. We're going to die. Why'd you bring us out here? Should have let us just stay there, like we told all of that. And they feel helpless and hopeless because things are not going their way. Um, Victor Hamilton points out it's kind of interesting. Um, the similarities between Israel's statement to Moses and Jonah's statement to God. Here's what Israel said to Moses: Is this not the word that we told you? Didn't we tell you? Again, I tell you so, I told you so is it's always been. Okay, I told you so's didn't just generate in this century or the last. All right, they've always been. We told you, just let us stay in Egypt. It would have been better for us to serve there than we should die in the wilderness. And remember Jonah, when God called him to Nineveh to preach, He didn't want to go. And because he didn't want to go, he jumped on a ship to go the opposite direction to what was then really the known end of the earth. And of course, there's the storm, and they're throwing everybody off and praying to their gods. And finally, Jonah said, "I'm the guy," and threw him in, and he got swallowed by the big fish and thrown up, and finally admits he'll go to tell Nineveh that God is going to judge them, and they just have a few days, and the whole thing's going to fall down, and they repent, and God forgives them for a while. Doesn't and look at what Jonah says. "Ah, Lord, was this not what I told you when I was still in the country? That's why I fled to Tarshish, for I know that you are gracious and merciful God, slow to anger and abundant loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm." That text is befuddling to me. Can you imagine you praying for somebody to be forgiven and then being mad because forgave them? I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but he's really just ticked off because he's got egg on his face. He told them if they didn't turn, they were going to be judged, and they turned. God forgave them, and Jonah said, "I knew you're going to do that. Why didn't you just let me stay on the boat?" So it's similar thing that Israel is doing. We so often think we know best, or at least we act like we do, and human nature does that and fails repeatedly. Moses, and he will have to do this many times, calms them down. Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." There's some great preaching text in that. Um, Things like, "The enemy that you see today, you will see again no more forever." What a great line that is. Or, "Just stand still, keep your mouth shut, and let God work." I mean, there's great sermon material right there. And that's what Moses says. You all relax. Watch what God is about to do. All right. Verse 15. This is kind of funny. The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me?" Now, there's something Moses didn't tell us here. Okay. Can I just, well, let's play with this a little bit. Moses comes out publicly. Everybody just relax. It's going to be great. God's got this under control. Y'all just be quiet, stand still, and you will see the salvation of the Lord. The next verse, God says to Moses, "Why are you crying to me?" So apparently, Moses went into the closed room and said, "God, I am in big trouble. I just told them everything is going to be okay. What in the world are you doing?" Do you see that happening here? It's an awesome picture. Um, what that means is you never believe the preacher behind the pulpit who says everything is okay. All right. He may not believe that either. He's just acting like he believes that. All right. I'm just kidding. Kathy, why are you nodding your head? Like, of course, everything's going to be fine, Kathy. Okay. All right. So look at verse 15. It's just so human. That's the Bible is human. Don't get it Moses did not have a halo. Moses was a great leader. Moses, deep down, trusted God, and he knew that he'd gotten this far, but he wasn't perfect. And he had some questions, but he knew the right thing to do was to calm the people down, and then he would talk to God. And so he did. And so the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. Lift up your rod, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow me. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I've gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and the horsemen." So Moses reassures the people, and God reassures Moses. Um, and he gives him instructions, and he gives him a promise. Then God acts. The angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. so that it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus, it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near to the other all night. So here, and then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So God's angel moves from in front of them to behind them. God's cloud became an encasement that separated the two. You know, in the Psalms, we hear about God being our rear guard. That's the picture here. He is before and behind. Psalm 139. You hem me in before and behind. That's the picture you have here. And later we will see the Ark of the Covenant, but God's presence is this encasing cloud and fire around them. So the fire, the cloud, the Ark of the Covenant will all three speak of God's presence in their midst, before and behind. And then the wind, it's a picture, the word wind is ruach. It's the spirits are both connected with water, just like the creation. Remember the creation, the spirits brooded over the water. So we've got, again, all of this activity. Dry ground appears as a result of all three working together. Verse 22. Um, so the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, um, and the waters were a wall to them on the right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, so that they may come back upon the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the armies of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. So not one Israelite is lost, and not one Egyptian is spared. Again, Moses and Elijah are kind of counterparts here. You remember that Elijah later will take the mantle and smite the waters, and the waters will be divided. But in the case of Moses, the second step will bring the destruction to the Egyptians, much like the walls caved in, like the walls fell in on Jericho. It's kind of how the water, kind of picture the water falling in on the Egyptians who are pursuing the Hebrews. And then verse 29, 30, and 31. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So Israel is saved. They saw the work of God. They feared the Lord, and then they also trusted in Moses. Now, as I say in the conclusion, that's short lived. It's all glorious right now, um, but they will very quickly complain and murmur again. First time they don't have what they want. But just a few thoughts to ponder. No sooner was Israel out of Egypt than Pharaoh wanted to again lay claim on them. Who would be their Lord was at the heart of the battle that took place at the Red Sea. Israel would only need to first stand still and then keep moving forward, and God would do the rest. Peter says, be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The enemy wants us to drift from the lordship of Christ. He wants us to doubt and question. Sometimes we need to first stand still and always be sober and vigilant because the adversary, our devil, seeks to devour us. It's exactly what Pharaoh is trying to do. Second question that we might want to ponder is, why is the wilderness even allowed? Was the wilderness the enemy? Had they missed the will of God? Neither. God had led them there. Um, this was his firstborn. He says, Israel is my firstborn. And where would he lead Jesus? He went into the waters to be baptized. So Israel goes into the Red Sea, and then they come out and they are led into the wilderness. Jesus went into the waters of the Jordan and was baptized, and the Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days and 40 nights. Israel will be there for 40 years. So see the picture, all right? So the wilderness was not, you're out of the will of God, no more than the wilderness was out of the will of God for Jesus. Spirit led him into the wilderness, and we can trust that God, by the pillar of fire and by the cloud, was leading Israel into the wilderness. And thus we can say, when we get led into the wilderness, relax, trust God. If the Spirit led Israel, his firstborn, and Jesus, his only begotten Son, into the wilderness, and he took care of both, don't you think he can take care of us if he leads us into the wilderness, right? Everybody nod your head if you agree. And thirdly, what Israel saw as a disaster at sea, the carnage, God saw as an opportunity to reveal his glory and for them to trust both him, God, and Moses. All right. So that's the deliverance from the Red Sea, or cross the Red Sea for Israel. Any questions? We will have time to look at this other document, but it's way more than you probably want to hear. So if you have questions and want to delay the way more than you probably want to hear, here's your chance. All right. Any questions? All right. That either implies that you want to get the misery over with quickly, or you actually are interested. All right. So I added this little piece. There are differing views, and if you even in notes of Bibles now, depending on the translation, the minority view that I will talk about has gained a lot of traction lately as to where exactly. I'm going to say it at the end, but what I'm about to share with you in just 10 minutes or so does not matter at all when it comes to our salvation. Everybody understand that? This is about as much as, well, I don't know. There's all kinds of examples I could give you. This is just one of those things that um, people that love to speculate like to sit around and talk about, and theologians enjoy this kind of stuff. But there is there is an emerging opinion that has developed that where we used to think that Israel crossed the Red Sea was not really where Israel crossed the Red Sea. So that really, let me just go to the map, if you would, um, on the back page. And notice at the top of the map, it says crossing one. All right, crossing one is where we have always said they crossed the Red Sea. And there are reasons for that, the wilderness of Shur. And if you look in little kind of just straight down from crossing one, you see Sinai one. And that is where Mount Sinai has traditionally believed to have been. Um, that has been for hundreds of years the view that people have held. There is an emerging yet minority view that believes that they actually crossed the Red Sea at what you notice there to the right is the Gulf of Aqaba, which is actually just an arm of the Red Sea. So they would still be crossing the Red Sea if they crossed there, and they would be crossing into Midian, and which is modern day Saudi Arabia, I believe, and Mount Sinai would be there instead of on the other side. All right. So those are the two views, all right? And and so I was asked about this by a couple of folks, and you may hear it, you may read it, you may see it in study notes, and you may make paper airplanes out of this when we're done if you don't care. But let me just kind of walk through this. So the traditional view, centuries old, is the northern crossing, and I already showed you the map. That is where the modern Suez Canal is. It's where the modern Suez Canal meets the Gulf of Suez. And in that traditional view, Mount Sinai is in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, which you saw on your map. Now, there is a minority view um, that is much more recent. And again, I pointed that out that actually the crossing took place on the eastern shore of the Sinai Peninsula at the Gulf of Aqaba, which again, we've looked at the map. And there's actually, believe it or not, dozens of other views. Okay. Those are the two main one, although I'll say at the end, there's a pretty strong view about a middle crossing as well. But the minority view is the one that probably outside of the traditional view has the most energy or steam. But there are three things that it really hinges on. Number one, that the Red Sea, which is actually translated correctly, the Sea of Reeds, um, always refers to the Gulf of Aqaba, and that the Sea of Reeds never refers to the northern crossing or the Suez. So it always, so the first view is that the Sea of Reeds always references the Sea of Aqaba, which is actually 250 miles from Egypt. Second thing that the minority view hinges on is that Mount Sinai has to be in Arabia. I'll show you why they believe that. And thirdly, um, the third thing it hinges on is that Mount Sinai is actually in Midian, which is now modern day Saudi Arabia. So let's take these three things. They say these have to be. So the first one is regarding the Red Sea, which again, literally is the Sea of Reeds. In Hebrew, the word is Suph, S-U-P-H is the transliteration. With different vowel pointers, it comes off something like Yam Suf, which can actually be the sea of the end or the sea of destruction. The Red Sea, that term that we use, comes from the Greek ethera thalassa, and actually, that term can refer to the arms of the Indian Ocean, all the way from the Suez, the Gulf of Aqaba, and even other branches as far as the Persian Gulf and the Bay of Bengal. All of those have been referenced as Ethera thalassa. The Red Sea, now, the minority view says the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, has to be the Gulf of Aqaba, and it can be. Let me show you. In the Bible, 1 Kings 9:26, King Solomon built ships at Ezion Geber, which is near Elath in Edom on the shore of the Red Sea. If you look at your map and look where Edom is, it's way over to the right. And so obviously the Gulf of Aqaba, if you look at that, in the Red Sea, if it's next to Edom, obviously it could be the Gulf of Aqaba, right? Everybody see that? All right. However, it can also refer to the Suez Canal area, which is just beyond Egypt. You look at Exodus 10:19, the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. And not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. Now, unless you picture that God lifted up the locusts and took them 250 miles all the way across the desert and landed them in the Sea of Aqaba, then it's clear that the Suez area could also be called the Red Sea. Now, could God do that if he wanted to? I suppose. But if I'm looking for a dumping spot, I'm going to dump them in the first spot I can dump them in and not take them all the way across the desert. Okay, now that's not the only thing. The proximity of the Red Sea is important. The narrative makes it seem like their crossing was pretty soon after the Passover. Um, Also, Exodus 13 says they took their journey from Succoth and they camped at Etham. These are the only two references where the only two encampments. And notice it says that Etham is at the edge of the wilderness. Succoth was just east of Egypt in Goshen, and Etham a little further east and north of the Red Sea. That is the northern Suez crossing place. So those are the only two encampments. If they would have had more encampments, and again, there could have been other encampments that weren't mentioned, but he only mentions two, and they are both right there. There would have needed to be several other encampments to travel all the distance down to cross at the Sea of Aqaba. Pharaoh in Exodus 14:3 says they are bewildered by the land or wandering around the land in confusion. This, again, seems like this is land he is familiar with just outside of Egypt. And then there is, go to the map and look at the wilderness of Shur, if you would. Look at the wilderness of Shur on the map. Look at crossing one in bright red and notice the way to Shur is right underneath that, and right below that is the wilderness of Shur. So if you go to 1 Samuel 15:7, then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. So the wilderness of Shur cannot be located down south, and the Bible says they traveled through the wilderness of Shur. And if you look at Genesis 16:7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. So if you look at that map again, she would have traveled from Canaan, which would have been northeast, down to the road to Shur. And again, the wilderness of Shur would have to be up in the northern northwest region, not down south. And Israel clearly traveled almost immediately into the wilderness of Shur, not down around the Gulf of Aqaba. At the very least, and I'm not going to give you anything definitive, at the very least, this renders the first absolute of the minority opinion as non-definitive. Their opinion is it has to be the Gulf of Aqaba every time, and that's simply not the case. So we can't be definitive on that. Secondly, the second hinge upon which their theory holds is that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. The reason they say that is Galatians 4:5. Hagar stands for Mount Sinai. Look at it, in Arabia. So if you go back to the map, look where Arabia is. Arabia would be that which is on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And so if Galatians 4:5 says that Hagar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia, then apparently it does have to be the Gulf of Aqaba. However, when Paul wrote this, the Romans controlled the area of the Sinai Peninsula. All of that was part of the Roman Empire. And the Sinai Peninsula, if you'll look there on the map again, where the original Sinai, Sinai 1 is, the Sinai Peninsula was known in the Roman Empire as Provincia Arabia, not Arabia proper, but rather Arabia Deserta. So, in other words, it would have been in Arabia at the time Paul wrote because the Roman Empire had that and controlled that. And so it was actually known as Arabia Deserta. So for him to say Sinai in Arabia would not have been a misspeak at all. Neither would it require Sinai to be east of Aqaba. So once again, it renders the second absolute of the minority opinion non-definitive. In other words, you can't say absolutely because there is an answer to that. And then thirdly, the third thing is that it must, Mount Sinai must be in Midian. Here's the reason for that. Let me read these to you. Moses fled. So I need to real quickly fill in the blanks. I won't be much longer, I promise. So remember when Moses killed the man, right, in Egypt, he fled to Midian. And when he fled to Midian, he met the priest of Midian, which ended up being his father-in-law, Jethro, right? So look at the bottom of page 2. priest of Midian, had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. We know, top of page 3, that the place of the burning bush and the place to where Moses will return, Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, to be the mountain of God. We read in Exodus 3:1, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God, which also is Sinai. Now here, go to the map one more time. Here's the argument. Go to the map, look at where Midian is. All right. And so the argument is if the mountain of God, the burning bush, is within the proximity of where Moses is, having met the Midianite priest and living there, then that has to place it east of Aqaba. Could not be on the other side of Aqaba. That's way too far. It's actually not that far. It's miles walking, but it would be a 4 to 7 day walk. And the shepherds of that time, if you read anything, and I never am able to pronounce it correctly, but so I won't even try, but the shepherds of that time, they had a special name, wandered for many, many miles, sometimes as far as 100 or 200 miles. And so for Moses in the good weather time of year to have wandered back to the other side would not have been out of the question at all. As a matter of fact, this may actually prove that it was not in Midian. And let me explain why. We'll get to this the second point we'll get to in a few weeks. When Moses was in the Sinai Peninsula, this is said that he was at Rephidim. I need you to go to Exodus 18 real quickly. Exodus 18. I need to show you all of these verses. Exodus 18. Actually, I want you to go to 19. So look at this. In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai, for they had departed from, look at this, they had departed from Rephidim. Okay. That's where they finally got up and headed toward Sinai. Go back to your map, if you would. Go back to your map. And would you look at down by Sinai 1, a little bit to the left is Rephidim. That's where they left when they headed to Sinai. Now go back to your notes. Anybody feel like they're in college or something like that? That's kind of fun. I love this. But now look at what happens right before they leave Rephidim. Look at your notes in Exodus 18:27. Moses sent his father-in-law. See, we'll get to this in a few weeks. Jethro comes and he visits Moses. Actually, forget that. Go to the one before that, Exodus 3:1. No. I was in the right place. Exodus 18:27. So let me tell you the story. Exodus 18, real quickly. Jethro comes to visit Moses. And this is where Jethro says, Moses, you're going to wear yourself out. You're judging everybody's case. You need to appoint judges. So he is with him at Rephidim. Everybody see that? 18:27. They're in Rephidim because they leave Rephidim in 19:1. And then Moses, after this is all over in 18:27, sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. So apparently it was not too far of a walk it's at Rephidim, not too far of a walk for Jethro to come from Midian, and he's older than Moses, over to Rephidim, and he goes back to his own country. It makes the same point when they actually leave. They left Sinai. Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, this father-in-law, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place about which the Lord said, I will give it to you. This is in Numbers, by the way. So it's the same record, but a little bit more specific. We're going to the place God said, come with us, Jethro. We'll treat you well, for the Lord has promised good things to Israel. He answered, no, I will not go. I'm going back to my own land and my own people. If Sinai is in Midian, it is in his land and in his country. No, I'm going to go back over to my own land and my own people, which renders the third absolute of the minority opinion non-definitive at the very least. All right. Here's some other things real quickly. I have 2 minutes. All right. Here we go. 2 minutes. Well, anyway, I better shut up. 2 minutes. All right. There's some other arguments. Saudi Arabia, there is a mountain that by some is called the mountain of God. However, I tried hard. I was unable to find a corroborating source for that other than people saying that's what it's called, but there's no citation for that. But this mountain has a blackened top, okay? And it also has a cleft in the rock. And of course, Moses was in the cleft of the rock, Elijah was in the cleft of the rock at Horeb. And so people have seen this blackened top mountain with a cleft in the rock and have assumed or speculated that this must have been where the fire came down on the top of Mount Sinai. However, I would point you to the fact this is not original with me, but the thing about God's fire is it doesn't leave residue. The burning bush was burning, but not being consumed. As a matter of fact, an aerial view of that mountain actually shows the whole mountain range is blackened. Scientists note that fire does not blacken rock, and it is more consistent with volcanic activity. So just a blackened rock does not scream Sinai in the face of biblical evidence. Secondly, Sinai was not known. One of the arguments is that Sinai was not known as Sinai until the 4th century CE. That's Common Era. But there's actually an Egyptian use of the name that was found as early as 2000 BC. So a blanket statement that Sinai wasn't even known of is not accurate with archaeological evidence. Baal-Zephon has been placed. If you find maps, you will find maps that has Baal-Zephon in the north, and you'll find it on the south. But it literally means Baal of the north. And some argue that it is actually located on Mount Turan in Saudi Arabia. The same is true, almost done. Same is true of Migdal and Pi Hahiroth. Pi Hahiroth actually means the canal or mouth of the water. Both have been suggested to have been located in the north, and some have suggested they are located in the south. But there are actually hieroglyphic markings in the north location for Migdal, Baal-Zephon, and Pa Hahiroth. Again, hieroglyphic markings. Recently, there has even been a strong argument made for a middle location for Israel to have crossed the Red Sea. So, what do we surmise by all of that? I could just say absolutely nothing, all right? And that might be better. But I would just say we should always proceed with caution. Much of the minority opinion was actually based and rooted in and popularized by the work of Ron Wyatt, who was actually an amateur archaeologist who also claimed to have found Noah's Ark and the Ark of the Covenant. He also claimed to have found Goliath's skeleton, chariot wheels that were stuck in the mud. Now, he's not the one that came up with that theory, but the theory was based, much of it was based on his work that was later completely discredited. Now, some people say it was discredited because they were jealous. Archaeologists may get jealous just like politicians. So maybe that did happen. I'm just saying in the archaeological community, Wyatt's work was discredited. The fact is that actual locations of the crossing of the Red Sea and Sinai cannot be determined with absolute certainty. Most still believe that when everything is considered, it points to a northern crossing. The arguments against are not compelling enough for me to jump the ship in a dogmatic way. The crossing of the Red Sea and the giving of law at Sinai, here's the bottom line, were real historical events that took place at real geographical places. The important thing is not the precise location, but the reality of the events and their meeting. And then what's a Bible study without quoting Alexander Pope, who said, "Be not the first by whom the new are tried, and nor yet the last to lay the old aside." All right. That is really good wisdom. We don't want to be the first to jump on the bandwagon, but if we're proven wrong, don't be too arrogant to say, okay, it was the Southern Crossing, maybe after all.